Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there?
Welcome to All the Shit with Tom and Will. This is the Quick Hit Weekly.
What's up, Tom?
What's going on, Will? Hey, man, welcome back to All the Shit. This is the podcast that continues the conversation that started with the book, All the Shit I Wish I Knew in High School, which is available for free as an audiobook at thathighschoolbook.com. Go check it out. Take a listen. Share it with your friends. Hopefully it opens some doors for you to some conversations that you have been wanting to have and don't know how to start, or maybe just give you some guidance and perspective on some of the questions you have going on in your life. That's why we're here, goofing off on a Friday evening. We're rolling into a weekend. You can't beat that.
No, you can't, especially coming off of a crazy week, which I've definitely had. I don't know how yours has been, but
Mine has not been bad, man. It was a productive week for me, which was good. And I had a meeting with my mentor this Monday, which went really well also. I talked through some of the stuff that we talked about last week about facing fears and stuff like that. And so he just encouraged me to, just start doing it, which is what we talked about ultimately on the podcast last week. So I've reached out to a handful of principals and guidance counselors in the local area and trying to set an opportunity to go sit down, have some coffee, and talk about what's going on from their perspective and how can we help.
that's awesome. Have you gotten any traction with that? Or?
Literally sent them today.
Okay, so yeah, this will be like a Wednesday type thing.
Yeah.
And your mentor, if memory serves, is back in Colorado, right?
No, this is a guy that I met here. He actually reached out to me when I first posted on LinkedIn about the book. When I first published it, he got a copy, read it, and reached out and said he wanted to meet with me. I think we've met 3 or 4 times in that span, maybe once a quarter, to catch up, see how things are going. And he's just been a good sounding board for me for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome, man. It's good, invaluable asset to have.
Yeah, I think having someone who's a little bit older than you that's been through some of this stuff, it's really difficult to have you can't even really call it a mentor if you're on the same age level as somebody, because you can have a mentor in terms of learning a skill that maybe you don't have. But when it comes to life and just general how to navigate the world, really you're doing yourself a disservice unless you're with someone who's a little bit older and has got a little more time in the game, so to speak.
Absolutely. They just have broader and more in-depth perspectives and experiences that they can share. I think that people like us, similar ages, there's perspectives, things that we share with one another that I think we each benefit from. But to your point, we're both at the same point in our lives. So there's not like, you don't see it yet, but I know what you're about to head into, and let me share that wisdom with you.
That's a different level than just sitting down and being like, hey, man, I feel you. That sucks. I've been there. And we're commiserating in it together, but neither one of us can really guide the other out of it.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Both are important, though.
Yes.
And so that kind of, today is going to be a little bit different. We don't have a question specifically today, but I want to just talk a little bit more, adding on to the conversation we had last week, and talk more about mental health generally. And I know that mental health is one of those things that some people hear it and they're like, no, I don't want to have that shitty conversation. I don't want to go down that road. But I think mental health it's so broad, right? So for example, when we're sitting here and we sit down every Friday and I'm like, hey man, how's your week going? What's going on with you? Effectively, that's a mental health check, right? We don't sit down and I'm like, hey, Will, how's your mental health this week? But by just simply asking you, hey, how's your week? If you feeling okay? Like, what's going on in your life? That's me asking you from a caring perspective of, hey, how are you? And then you'll either tell me that things are good, or a lot of times on here we talk about stuff that's going wrong for us or has been a little tough. And so that's all a mental health check really is. But mental health encompasses everything that we've talked about on this podcast so far, and that really is at the root of what the book is about. Your mental health can simply be uncertainty about any number of things going on in your life, even if you don't have an emotion that you can ascribe to it in that moment. It's all rooted in mental health. How are you doing in your head with the shit that's going on in your life?
And it's not just depression and despair. Joy, sadness, happiness, all these things are an aspect of mental health.
Right.
It's not just the negative, dark, scary stuff. And I think to an extent, I understand in general, it seems as if society is trying to make it more appropriate, not more appropriate, easier to talk about mental health, but they've almost stigmatized it in a way because to your point, hey, how is your mental health? Oh, whoa, I don't want to talk about that. But again, I think there may be a point at which there's been a mind shift, and we're almost approaching it more as a...
Well, apply that same concept to anything else. If you go to the gym regularly and someone asks you, hey, how's your physical fitness? If you're in shape, you're going to be like, hey, great. This is what I'm working on. Things are going well. Physical fitness is not, hey, this is just for obese people. We're only asking about...
You know what's interesting about that, and where my mind immediately goes, physical fitness is visibly evident. Mental health is not. I think certainly that can be a component of it as well. If you are out of shape, it's hard to hide that you're out of shape to a certain extent. And because it's just out there for everybody to see, it might be a little easier to talk about fitness and your health than your mental health, because it's not out there to see, and you probably haven't made a point of putting it on display.
No, that's fair. I'm saying from the standpoint of when we talk about mental health, everyone immediately goes to depression and anxiety and all of the downsides of it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm referring to when I say unintentionally we've stigmatized it.
Right. And so I'm saying to normalize that, yeah, that's a part of mental health, but just like you said, the joy, the happiness, everything that's going on, that's going great in your life is also a part of your mental health. Just like in physical fitness, it's not just the people that are struggling or trying to work their way to health. It's also the people that are healthy and are enjoying what they're doing.
Yeah.
You can talk about physical fitness to everybody. Where you are on that journey, on that particular day or that particular point in time, that's going to vary. And that's the same with mental health. So what I'm trying to say is it shouldn't be stigmatized. You shouldn't hear that term and immediately think, oh, someone thinks I'm depressed.
But I think we do.
We do, and that's the point. It's trying to destigmatize that. I think is what you're saying is, yes, typically because people who are talking about mental health are very concerned about the state of mental health of whatever group, and for good reason. But it's not just that. So I want to draw that point is that mental health encompasses how you are overall. If someone asks you, how's your mental health? They're not saying, hey, I think something's wrong with you. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
So it's not always just that. And if you think about mental health more broadly and ascribe it to my life as a whole and how I'm doing, I think it's a more approachable topic than once you tear down that facade of, well, this is only for negative emotions.
Yeah.
I read an article this week, and I shared it with you. It was an article that was published actually in November of 2023 in the UK version of Men's Health. And what caught my eye is that it is talking about teens and mental health. This is what put me in the mindset of, well, this is everything that we're talking about is related in some way. And I was grabbed by a few of the statistics, which I didn't know. And statistics are statistics. But I think it serves as a good framework for talking about why this is so important. And according to this article, suicide is the leading cause of death for men under age 50.
And I was trying to recall, I couldn't recall from the article, is that statistic unique to the UK or is that more of a global statistic?
I'm not sure, but I would say that it's probably representative. If you compared the UK and the US, we're pretty similar in a lot of those metrics.
Yeah.
Under 50, that's us. It's also the third most common cause of death for ages 10 to 19.
Just mental health in general, as I was reading this article and as we've been talking, there was an aspect that stands out to me. And I think that more people feel more comfortable about discussing struggles than they did in the past, or it's just getting better press, right? But from my perspective, I don't think that these struggles are unique to the folks that are talking about them. I believe that we all have these struggles and they just all impact us a little bit differently. And some of us are more able to work through them at a higher functional level, and they impact some people more than others. Because a lot of times, and I don't know if you find this, but just what I've picked up in interacting with other people, what I see on articles like this, what I've experienced, what I see others have experienced or they've shared with me, a lot of the underlying struggles, fears, anxieties, whatever, are all the same. And sometimes it almost seems like it's the perspective or the way the person manages it that is the key difference, which can be dependent on a lot of different factors.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that's it. We talked about a little bit last week again is having the ability to connect and really just acknowledge that you have emotions that you have to deal with. Because if you're still on the fence about even acknowledging it, because there's some shame in acknowledging that you might have some sadness or some fear in you, if you're not able to address that within yourself, then you're not going to be able to process it. And so that does spiral into the mental health gets worse because you don't have an outlet for it. And I think it's also, as you age and you mature, you become more capable of talking about those things in a lot of cases. I think it's a lot harder as a younger person, especially in high school, where there is still stigma attached to the idea of weakness because you're in that phase where you're still sorting out where do you fit in the pecking order. And that's just a natural part of biology. That's any primate group you look at. And if you go to the root of it, that's all we are. We're primates. And so that unfortunately is a part of high school. It's also why there's way more bullying in middle and high school than at any other point in your life. It's not common. Well, not as common, I'll say that. I haven't experienced bullying outside of school once I graduated. Even in college, it wasn't really bullying. It was okay to slip into whatever clique or whatever you were into with less stigma attached than in high school where everyone's looking at you.
Well, you're 5'11" and 215 pounds, right?
Well, now...
Yeah, I'm kidding. I think what really also, and you've touched on this already, also stood out to me was the value in having a mentor, which as we opened up spoke about your mentor, but that was a big part of the article as well, and talked about several programs that paired older men up with younger kids who had similar mental health struggles or anxieties, and just really illustrated the value from the perspective of both those individuals, the mentor and the mentee.
It goes back to the point that you made earlier where most of us, if not all of us, have the same struggle. But when you're not able to talk about it freely or you don't feel comfortable or safe talking about it or acknowledging it, you live in that bubble of this is my shit and this is my issue. And I should figure this out for myself, by myself.
Where do you think all that shame comes from that prevents people from talking? Because to your point, we are social creatures, right? And it's almost like a survival mechanism to find and seek out a tribe and all of that. So where do you think that shame comes from that makes it so hard for people to talk about their struggles, to ask for advice, to find others with similar experiences and perspectives?
I think a lot of it just goes back to the stereotype that's been perpetuated to us, that true red-blooded American man, and I think this is true in many cultures, other cultures not so much, but for us, it is the independence. It is the ability to fight and defend oneself, one territory. It's your ability to mitigate or dismiss your emotions and push them aside as if they don't exist. And the problem with it is when you look at it from a Hollywood or a perspective that is not reality, it doesn't really measure up. So you're setting out an unfair standard to measure up to. It is the same as watching a movie like Rambo or Shooter. I don't know if you saw that. It was a movie with Mark Wahlberg where he's a retired
Sniper
Navy
of some
SEAL or
sorts,
whatever,
yeah.
and he lives out in the mountains by himself, completely self-sustaining. He's fine. But the truth of the matter is that's the equivalent of watching porn and thinking that's what real sex is like.
I don't think I wouldn't say that. I feel like that's a stretch.
It's a stretch, but I don't think it's much of a stretch. Yeah, this is what sex looks like, but not quite like that in real life. If you made a sex tape, let's not.
Yeah, it would be amazing. OnlyFans, Bald Beauty, 6969. No, so my point being is, again, and I think we differ a little bit in our perspectives on this, I think that there are those who thrive on being alone and can be self-sufficient and don't need to be surrounded by people constantly, and that's where they get their energy, that's where they find their peace. I tend to be more of one of those people than the type that needs approval or needs a group or needs a tribe.
But you have all those things. You have all those things. So you can't really truly say that. Those two movies I referenced are one example.
Right.
And then if you watch, for example, a reality series like Alone, which I've not seen, I've only heard about. I understand the concept.
Yeah.
But you get dropped in the wilderness by yourself. You survive for as long as you can and try and outlast the other people that are out there alone. Yeah, it's really hard to physically endure it, but being by yourself is the biggest thing. I think that it becomes a mental game in the end. And so compare that series and that show to something like Rambo, and it's completely different. You kind of see the reality versus the Hollywood version. And so for you to say, well, I don't really need all those things, you have them. So it's harder to say that you don't need them.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with a couple different people. I am confident I could kill on Alone. Confident from a mental aspect.
Well, that's why these shows do so well, because there's a lot of assholes out there like you that are like, oh, I could do this.
Yeah. And everybody automatically says that. I really am okay alone, like 110%.
Yeah, I get that. So am I.
Yeah.
But I also haven't been alone, literally myself, no other human contact for longer than, I don't know, 2 or 3 days if I've done a solo backpacking trip or something. And even then, you run into somebody on the trail at some point.
What network is this on?
Alone?
Yeah, is it
I don't
NBC
know.
or something
I
like
have
that?
no idea.
Whoever the hell it is, hit me up. I'm going to smoke the record. I'll take all your money. Prove me wrong.
I would bet my entire life savings, house, I'll mortgage everything and bet against you. There's no
I'll
way.
take
There's
that
absolutely-
bet.
There's no way.
I'll take that bet. You're going to be like, damn, that is one stoic Irishman.
Well, look, man, there's a reason that solitary confinement is being argued as torture and that it should be abolished as a prison sentence because the mental anguish of having no one is too much to bear. Even if you want to go back and look at Hollywood, look at the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. Boring as hell to watch when I watched it the first time because I didn't understand what the concept of
I
it
never
was. Right?
actually saw the movie. I know,
But he's
I know the movie.
alone on
Yeah.
an island and his best friend is a volleyball.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down
I
to.
would have gotten rid of the volleyball so I could have my alone time. I know you don't believe it, but I'm not just talking shit. I am sincere. I think there are some that appeals to more than others and can manage it well.
All right. Well, then let's look down the evolutionary ladder a rung and look at chimpanzees, orangutans,
The
baboons.
fucking animals.
Yeah, so are you, bud.
You too.
You're a couple genes removed, right? They probably look at you and be like, that's one bald monkey. But
I've seen bald chimps before.
if you
so-
watch any of the documentaries on any type of socially grouped animal, there's always like, oh, the young male, and it's always got to be like an Australian or a British guy that's narrating this
Crikey,
thing, right?
mates, look at him. What a beaut.
But it's always, the young male needs to make some friends. If he's off on his own, he's going to die.
He's a goner.
And it's the whole thing of
Yeah.
you cannot survive long term by yourself. Because if anything happens, you get a cut while you're out there on alone. Mm-hmm. If you get that infected, you're going to die
Sure.
because you have no one to take care of you. It goes beyond just the mental support. It's also the physical support, but you can't do it
But
by
if you're
yourself.
out there with a group of 3 people and you get a cut, they're not going to stop it from getting infected and you could still die. What about these monks who are out in the middle of nowhere and solitary all by themselves, or these hermits that have done this? There's
I'm
a
not saying
large
it's
portion of them.
impossible. I'm saying for the majority of us, the vast majority of us, it is impossible. But if there's 1 or 2 crazy folks out there that have a special ability to do this, and when I say crazy, I'm not talking mentally crazy, just they have an insane
Freaks,
ability to do this. Great. That's not our audience. The guy in the hobbit hole who paints himself like a cheetah is not listening to this podcast. That's not who I'm talking to here. I'm trying to talk to the majority of young men who are struggling with this and think that that outlier that you're talking about is the model and the standard, when what we're really saying is that's the exception. It's not the general rule. I understand what you're saying about you like to have your alone time. So do I. Right? I live in a very solitary place. For the most part, my social interaction is at work, which is also not my favorite place to be. So if I'm going to get social interaction, that's one of the benefits of me going into the office. That is what picks me up a little bit. And meetings like this. But if I had absolutely nothing, even if I had just my dogs, it would be a very lonely existence, and that would be a problem.
For you.
For me. Yeah. And I think over time, for you, would you last longer than me? Maybe. But at the end of the day, being solitary with no one to share anything with, another great example is Into the Wild. The young man who went out into Alaskan wilderness and wound up dying. One of the things that he wrote down that always stuck with me, he said, happiness is only real when it's shared. To me, that rings true because if you experience anything, you have to be in such a Zen-like place, to your point. If there's a monk out there that's doing this, and chances are it's not a lifetime thing. That's why there's colonies of them or whatever you call a group of monks. But if you experience something in your life, if you can't share that with anyone, that also starts to create, have you ever been in a situation where something really great has happened or something terrible has happened, whatever, and you're just looking around like, who can I tell? Who can I tell? Who can I tell? That energy is the same. You still have that emotion that you want to let out. And if you can't, then where does it go? it becomes a toxin and you also can't release. I think at the very, very extreme ends of the spectrum, yeah, you might be right. But when we're talking generally about being independent and thinking that independence means you can survive on your own entirely, dissociated, disconnected from society, from friends, from family, I think it is very, very much an outlier situation. You can be a strong man, be independent, but independence does not necessarily mean that it is only you that can solve a problem, fix something that's wrong, even if it is a situation where ultimately to fix it, it's something you have to do. You still not have to be in that alone. You can still have people with you for support, even if it's just like, for me, my mentor, I'm still the one doing these things that I told you I was afraid to do last week. But it was just me being able to voice to him what was going through my mind, what's happening, how I'm feeling, and him to say, yeah, well, consider this, this, and this. And he asked me, he's like, well, based on that, what are some small steps you can take? This and this. All right, then let's try this or this. All right, cool. It doesn't make me do anything. It doesn't give me anything other than knowing that someone else now knows that this is something I'm working with and dealing with, and it made me feel a lot better and gave me the confidence to start doing the thing that I was afraid to do.
Yeah, in that way, he's sharing that burden with you.
Yeah, it's still my burden to carry. It's still my thing. But just having someone else aware of it makes things different. So again, I think that the idea of the independent male as the pinnacle of what manliness should be, I don't need anybody, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. Whether or not you are one of those elite folks who can do it all yourself, or you're a person that is better off in a group setting of some kind, even if it's just 2 or 3 friends, it doesn't have to be a huge group. If you are looking at that as the standard.
No, that's a good point. Maybe that is the problem, viewing something, anything as the standard. There is no standard, okay?
Right.
Yeah, so there's something to that. If I am the type of individual that does better not surrounded by people, but I view those that are surrounded by people and always share their joys and their stresses with people as the standard, then I'm putting stress on myself to put myself in situations that I'm going to be uncomfortable in. And I think the opposite could be true as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
I think that's a key part of it is this standard fallacy. Yes, there are norms that are pushed by society and all of that, but seeing something and going, that's not me, but I have to ascribe to that or I have to fit that mold, that's where mental health can take a huge hit.
Absolutely. And I think that is really the key. It's whatever you see around you, right? What defines masculinity, what defines that stereotype for you is going to be influenced directly by where you live, how you were raised, what type of man is your dad? Is your dad around? If not, who are you looking at for guidance in this? None of us come into the world knowing what it means to be a man or what emotions we should be feeling in that regard. It's all influenced by what's around us. To your point, whichever side of the spectrum you fall on, if whatever you are looking at as the standard does not match who you are going to feel like you're letting somebody down or that you're not enough as you are to be considered worthy of being a man. And then all of that spirals into the shame, fear about, am I going to be accepted, and leads to isolation. So it's really about overcoming that paralysis. How do you overcome that paralysis of saying, well, I'm not that, I can't live up to that expectation, so I'm better off doing nothing? Because in that situation, you find yourself just wallowing in a cesspool of all the bullshit, and you get further and further sucked down. So how do you overcome that paralysis?
I'd back up a little bit. I think, yeah, maybe there is something to that, but just acknowledging that I'm not that, for some people may be enough that you don't even get to that sunk down in the mire or the cesspool or whatever you want to call it. There's power in acknowledging that's not me. And I can be okay with that. Now, that's not everybody. For some people, that causes even more stress and anxiety.
But I think that tends to come later because when you're younger, all you really want is to fit in. All you're trying to do is, how do I attach
and I don't know,
myself?
Maybe that's why we differ so much. And I have a hard time with this because throughout my life, I don't feel like I fit in anywhere. I walk the fringes or the outskirts of all these groups, and I'm okay with that, and I'm comfortable in that. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I think that's part of the reason that my perspective is that I don't need a group to thrive. I'm kind of on the outskirts of a little bit of everything. And so maybe it's been my life experience. That's where I fit in, and I've come to accept that from an early age. And in a way, I'm at peace with it.
Well, I think it's an advantage and a disadvantage to you. It's just your circumstance that you didn't go to public high school, that you were homeschooled all the way through. So yeah, you didn't have the same pressures. You didn't experience this in the same way that most kids who go to
not
public
the
school
same way,
do.
but I played soccer. We were involved with all sorts of groups. I did martial arts for years and years. So I wasn't what some people think when you say, you were homeschooled. Okay, you're like on the spectrum or something like that.
Yeah, I get that, but I would say it's not quite the same.
No,
because
it's not. It's not. It's
and
different.
growing up playing baseball, where I played ball, all of Little League was pulling from the pool that went to 4 or 5 different schools. And so, yeah, I might be on a team with someone that goes to a different school, and I could still play baseball with them. And my experience with them, my association with them was simply, I play baseball with this person. Whereas someone that I went to school with was like, oh, this person's kind of a loser because of X, Y, and Z thing that I only know about because we go to school together.
And you have
this
for a
other
long
person
time.
could also be a loser based on the construct that I have in my head. But because I only associate playing baseball with them, it's not the same, right? And so I think to you, yes, you get to get out, you get to hang out with other kids, but they don't see you the same way that they would see you being that same person in a school setting where they see you constantly.
For years on.
That's the difference, I think. So that's the advantage, is that, yeah, you could still get to hang out with kids and have friends, but they know you as, oh, I'm doing martial arts with this kid, I'm doing whatever sport with this kid. Not, I have to measure myself against him because in a pool of limited resource for popularity and status in high school, I'm in competition with him. There's a difference between now I'm competing with him or we're just friends because we play together and we're on the same team. So I think that's where it's a little bit different. And so going back to what I was saying, I think as you mature and you get older, like, you know, for us being in our 40s, it's much easier for us to look at this and say, all right, I'm paralyzed by this thing that now I'm seeing it's not real. It's fake. It's made up and it's pitched for whatever reason. It's generally agreed upon, but who wrote the rule book? As soon as you can say, I don't ascribe to this, and I'm going to carve my own path and make my own model of what this means to be healthy, whether that's my ability to share my emotions, my ability to say, yeah, I do X, Y, and Z that society or the stereotype has told me for my whole life is not manly, but you know what? I'm comfortable with it now, and I don't give a shit. And that's what we're talking about last week a little bit, is being able to throw the finger and be like, you know what? You say what you want, but I'm comfortable being me, and I'm better for having embraced who I am, letting out all of the emotion in whatever way makes me feel better. As long as I'm okay with that and I'm comfortable in who and what I am, anyone that's making fun of me for that, my response now is there's something in you that is bothering you that you haven't dealt with. Seeing me do something that you don't feel comfortable with is a trigger for you, and your way to lash out is to be outwardly violent or spiteful or hateful toward me. And I think that's ultimately what bullying is. As a bully, you're looking at something that you see in someone that makes you uncomfortable on some level. They're better at school than you, or they're, any number of things can make you feel inadequate in some way. And if you don't have a better way to process that emotion, then that becomes a reason for you to target a person. So I think all of it, bullying, all of the social stratification, all of that ultimately comes down to, well, how do I see myself? And is what I'm looking at reflecting my values or challenging them in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable? So I guess a way to look at this then is this really makes the case for mentorship, and specifically finding someone that you can speak to who's older, who has more of a perspective and can help you dispel some of those things that are bothering you because it's dissonant with what you have in your head as the standard.
Yeah, I think that perspective is key. I think mentorship is invaluable, and I can't believe it's not pushed to a greater extent at younger and younger ages. I feel like there should be more programs more readily available through school, through other public services that do that, because it seems so absent.
I mean, in a sense, that's kind of a gap that we're trying to fill in our limited capacity. And it's two of us sitting here on a Friday night talking into microphones, but it's really just being able to put some words and an opinion together that kind of differs and gives young men and young women the opportunity to say, okay, there's an alternative to this, and maybe it's time for me to start embracing that. And hopefully what we're saying is giving them permission in a weird way, permission in the sense of, you see someone do something and you're like, okay, well, I guess it's okay then. Especially if you're in a place that you have not been before and you're looking around trying to figure out, how do I behave? What is okay? What's acceptable? No one has to say, Will, you can do this. But if you see someone do it, all right, cool, I can do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I mean by permission. But having someone that will give you that permission to question that standard and start to take apart the pieces that don't make sense to you and don't fit for you. So going back to beat that dead horse one more time, being completely isolated and alone in that, there's no room for mentorship. So you have to give yourself room and permission to go and seek the opinion of someone else. As much an advocate of mentorship as you are, do you have any good stories or points in your life that someone's imparted something to you that's been memorable?
Not really. No, and I think that's why I'm like, I see the value in it. Many times I've looked back and thought that I wish I had somebody to give me more direction, particularly like professional advice and things like that, on being intentional about building a career and building skills that will serve you your whole life. I think there's always been a few folks that I've just had deep philosophical conversations with on and off over the years, but I would never consider myself to have ever had a mentor.
I guess there's a lot of layers to that. A mentor doesn't necessarily have to be a formal thing. It's more someone that you look up to and say, you know what, I want to spend a little more time around this person because I think that there's some good character traits that can rub off on me, hopefully. And even if it's not a, hey, will you be my mentor? You can look at someone, you can surround yourself with people and insert yourself into a situation where you can spend more time around those folks. It could even just be if you play sports. If you have a coach that you do admire, just spend more time around that person and get to know them a little better. I think a lot of coaches would appreciate the opportunity to be a mentor to the young men that they're coaching. For me, it was something that I wanted, but I never had.
Did you know you wanted it? Or is that more in retrospect?
No, I think I knew that I wanted it. I didn't know how to ask for it, and I didn't know how to seek it. And I also didn't have coaches, with a couple exceptions, that I would have felt comfortable
made good
with.
Mentors.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dickheads out there too that are just doing it for a little extra cash.
Yeah.
Make sure it's someone that makes sense to you. I want to pivot on this a little bit. It's going to look at it from a little different angle. You said that a lot of the stuff that you were interested in mentorship for was how to grow professionally, all these things. Would you say that you are a contented person? How do you view contentment in your life in its relation to your emotional state?
Oh, yeah. I view it as complacency. So no, I would not say I'm contented. And I think this is another key area where we differ greatly. I understand the principle and the concept of contentment, but it's not something I've ever been able to obtain.
What do you think is preventing that?
I don't know. Sometimes I think it's just an unrelenting drive to pursue personal growth, right? Development as a person. Other times, I don't know.
What does contentment mean to you? Because I think you can be content without being complacent.
Yeah. And I acknowledge that theoretically I understand that concept. I think that you can be content without being complacent. I don't think I can be content without being complacent.
Well, I think I can because for the last, 15, 20 years, my personal mantra is always content, never complacent.
Yeah.
So the idea is not that, I've done it, I'm going to sit back and do nothing more. The idea is, this is where I am in this moment, which is, get real philosophical. This is the only moment we have. And now we have this one. And now we have this one.
Yeah.
Right. But to be content, not at all times, but generally, I wake up in the morning and think, you know what? I'm in a good spot. I'm not about to die. I'm not feeling threatened. I can be content in this moment. And it starts small. You have to take those small steps and you build over time and realize that contentment is not necessarily always there for sure. I have so much drive to go and do other things. And sometimes I find myself very discontented with the pace of those things.
Yeah.
And that drives a lot of the emotions that, we talked about last week and have carried forward is, man, I wish this was going faster. I wish I could do X, Y, and Z. I wish this was already done and I was on to the next thing. But if you can't be present in that moment, and being present is being content, it's very tough to be present and not content, because if you're not content, you're thinking about something else. And so you're not present, right?
Yeah. And I think obviously it's going to wax and wane for everybody. I think that the closest I ever come to contentment is when I am learning something new, right? Growing, like aggressively growing, seeing a lot of personal growth over a short period of time. But that's typically short-lived too, because the focus is always on the next thing for me. And it's likely a character flaw.
I don't know if it's character flaw.
Yeah.
It is who you are, right?
Yeah.
So again, this is that standard? What are you measuring against to say it's a flaw?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
But I'm going to come and kick this dead horse one more time.
Yeah, sure. Bring it on.
So if you are not content and you have a hard time being content, how do you think you could be alone with yourself and be content?
Tom, you're killing me. That is irrespective of whether I'm alone or whether I'm surrounded by people.
You're just discontented in general?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. I am honestly the most content when I am by myself. But in order to find that contentment, I'm disconnecting from everything else. I'm unplugging electronically. I'm going out. I'm going to go hiking, go backpacking, get out somewhere where there's no other distractions that can capture my attention and pull it away. And when I'm in that space, I am the most content because there is nothing else going on.
But
and
that
I'm
speaks
able
more
to,
to
be there.
the mindfulness and the being in the moment. that
It
you
does,
mentioned.
yeah. And that's a great point. I think that mindfulness, whether it's meditation of any type, learning to be mindful of what you're feeling. And again, it goes back to being able to accept that, yep, I'm having a feeling. Now, what is the root of this feeling? And then how do I address that?
Yeah.
Right? It all comes down to that. It all
Yeah,
starts
yeah. And I think for me, most of it stems from just this deep, gnawing, unescapable desire to do more, to be more. And it's just innate and it's constant. And there is no, in a way, it's good, depending on your perspective, because you will never arrive anywhere. And acknowledging that, you can take some peace in pursuit of growth, a continuum of personal and professional development and growth. On the other hand, it can also be exhausting because it's always on to the next thing, as you said.
If you're going to look at it that way, though, there should be certain things that you're aiming for. And then you're hitting those points on the path and ideally enjoying the journey, which is the contentment part of it.
It's a beautiful greeting card, and I know why it's sold so well over the years, but it's not a reality for me.
This is more just a personal thing that I'm curious about. Where do you see that path going? Do you have an end goal in mind as you're trying to do more? What is the end goal?
Yeah, death. And no, I mean, that is the end of this life, and to have reached that and not led a meaningless and average life.
How will you know, though?
Oh, probably won't, right? But you ask me a question, that's my response.
Okay. Yeah, I want so badly for you to find some contentment and to be okay.
Yeah. I think the pursuit of contentment would damage me further than being okay without being.
Well, I think that's
being
the
content.
thing is you can't pursue contentment. You either are or you are not. It's a tough thing to pursue. Pursuit is the not complacent part of that equation. You can be content and also I will be moving forward, but in
But would
this
you say
moment,
contentment is a natural state where people are just content? No,
I
feel like
think that
most people
it
have
used
to
to be.
pursue it.
I think nowadays, because of the speed that things are coming, the amount of
Being
distractions,
surrounded by people constantly, social media.
social media
Yeah,
is a big one.
Surrounded
Yes.
by people, which makes us all happy and healthy.
Not even surrounded by people. You can be content. If you're sitting at a table with a bunch of friends and you're having a couple drinks, playing some cards at a party, you can be content in that moment
Yeah.
without having to do anything.
You could also be discontent in that moment.
You sure can. Let me ask you this then. Are you content just sitting here having a conversation with me right now? Or is something pulling your attention, your mind, you feel like you should be going and doing something else?
That's a good question. My mind is always, I feel like it's always half one place, half another.
Mine too. It's always all over the place. I can have multiple thoughts going at any given time. For example, sitting on the porch with Anna, we're just hanging out after work. I'm very content to just sit there and be with her. We don't even have to be talking the whole time, but it's just being in that environment. I feel comfortable. I love being around her. I love spending time with her, the dogs, just out on the back porch. And she'll ask me, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, well, do you really want me to go into it? And I'll walk her down a rabbit trail of 5 different ideas I had and how they connected. So in that moment, my head's going all over the place. But as a whole, I'm still contented and very happy with where I am in that moment.
Yeah, I just don't frame the world in contentment. I frame it in next steps. So even at the end of a long week, right? Sitting on the couch, unwinding, it's like, all right, well, it's this time, next is bed, gonna get up, do this just constantly. It's just, I don't know. It's weird. It's the way my brain works.
I think
Or it doesn't work.
I think a lot of
Yeah.
people do. And so that's if you remember the intro that I did on the conversation I had with Justin right before Thanksgiving. And I was lamenting the fact that I was going to bed, and for the last hour or so, I'd been looking forward to getting in bed, looking forward to sleeping, blah, blah, blah. As soon as I got to that point, I was already thinking about, man, I'm looking forward to my coffee in the morning. I'm looking forward to doing this and this. And I skipped over the contentment part. I skipped over enjoying what I'd been looking forward to.
I find that amazing though. Do you typically find yourself going, oh, need to be content? You
No, it's a
frame the
natural
world in
state for me
contentment, or-
because I've practiced it constantly.
Yeah.
Since I started that mantra of always content, never complacent.
And how long has that been?
At least 15 years, 20 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because this was my mantra when I met Anna, and she got it tattooed on her side.
Oh, wow.
So
What was behind getting to that point where you're like, this is my personal mantra?
I think what it really ultimately came down to is I realized I wasn't happy a lot.
Yeah.
And it was because I was constantly thinking about what's next, what should I be doing, what can I be doing. I don't remember if I read something, saw something inspired me to look and say, dude, this is what you've got right now. You got to look around and just be okay with it. Because if you can't be content in a moment at any point in time, you're going to go through life discontented, get to your deathbed and be like, well, that was a fucking waste of time.
Right.
And that's my biggest fear. It's kind of to your point. You want to feel like you've accomplished something, you've done something, you've lived a life worth living. I don't see a way that you can have a life worth living if you were never contented at any point. I think the human's natural point of stasis is contentment. It used to be a lot easier because we had more free time to just sit around and be okay. There's so much demand placed on us now to be doing this, doing that, working, taking care of this, taking care of that, following up on social media with friends. There's so many more demands on our time than there used to be. We don't know what downtime is anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to be content in the small areas and spaces we have between obligations. I think the world is sped up to the point that it's made contentment less common than it used to be.
I don't see much of it when I look around. And
Exactly,
see other
yeah.
people, there's certainly not a lot. I think that's why it's unique, and it strikes me as unique every time you talk about it. I'm like, oh, who the fuck's talking about contentment, bro?
But I think that's part of a mindfulness practice, and that I was doing that before I even knew what a mindfulness
Which
practice
is why
was.
that all spoke to you so much.
Right. Yeah. So
TM and all that.
hearing Jeff talk about that in the conversation I had with him, it's like, yes, I've been doing this. I didn't know what it was called, but that's how I've gotten myself to the point where in most situations I can find contentment because it's all I have. I can either hate my life right now or I can be content in it. Even if it's not ideal, if I'm content, it's better than hating my life.
Yeah.
So for me, it is a process, but if you start thinking about in terms of in this moment, this is my situation. If I cannot change it, my choices are to either be content or be miserable. And then you stay in that moment until such a time as there is something else that you can change. And then you're not complacent. You go and make that change.
So what was that like for you, making that shift, identifying or acknowledging that I'm typically not happy and I'm going to pursue this? What was that transition like? Was it hard? Did it come easy?
No, it wasn't easy. I mean, it took me years, but it was just the constant reminder of, well, if you're not happy and you want to be, the only thing you can do is work on being content with what you do have.
Yeah.
Focus on the things you can change. And it goes back to the serenity prayer, which goes back to stoicism, which goes back. It's always the same throughout human history. All right. It's said in any number of different ways, but it's control the things you can, which are very few.
Very few.
Change the things that you can to improve your position. Otherwise, hey man, you got to let go of the other shit because otherwise all it's going to do is drag you down. You're going to be looking at all the things you think you want or think you should be doing or think you should be achieving. And if you're not content with where you are, while still looking and saying, yeah, it would be nice to do that, I'm going to take that next step and go that direction. But you have to be content in the here and now. And if you're not, it's not going to be a good ride for you.
Well said.
Maybe that ties a nice little bow on it. We beat around the bush a lot and took a long and winding path to get here. But I would say the biggest thing is finding a way to address your emotions, understand that mental health is not a condemnation of you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing and you're in a bad spot mentally. Mental health is the entire gamut of feeling, emotion, living, being as a person in the world. And ways to combat that, we talked about finding things that give you positive energy. One way that you can start to work on getting rid of those emotions, if you are one of those people that is a little bit hesitant to show any emotion, is to journal, to write. A lot of times you can get emotion out through writing, and you're looking at it almost in a third person perspective. You can read back what you've written, and it will help you to process those emotions. For me, I do that verbally. A lot of times when we have a conversation, it's happened on this show, I'll be talking about something and realize as I'm talking my way through it, oh shit, that's what I think. It's just the ability to process in some way, whether verbally or written.
And even on the written, some people find traditional journaling or a diary helpful. Some it's music, some it's writing stories.
Yes,
right? It's about the same thing, but maybe it's pertaining to a fictional character or a fictional group of characters. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing.
It is, yeah. And you're right, because you're projecting that as this is what this person thinks. It's still coming from your head, man.
Getting it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
So find a way to get it out, whether or not you want to cry about it, whether you want to talk about it. Find some way to get it out. Get a pen and paper, whatever you want to do. I know that for me, even writing this book, my mission was to help young men deal with these issues. But as I was writing it, I processed a lot of shit that I'd repressed and didn't realize. But it was just about thinking about it again, writing it out, and then coming up with, oh, okay, this is what I wish I knew at the time. It's only in retrospect and hindsight and thinking and processing it that some of this is coming out.
Yeah, and take that time. Take that time to think, to process, to be introspective, because there's a lot of value that can come from that, and that can positively impact your mental health just in and of itself.
That's right. And taking that time to be introspective is about being content in that moment with what you've been given. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. And it doesn't mean you have to stay there for a long time. But in that moment, that's what you got to work with. Be content with that, process it, and then move on. Oh, man, this is an interesting one tonight.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add to this conversation?
No, man, we've been all over the freaking place. My head's spinning.
Yeah. That's what a long day at work will do, or a long week at work really will do to you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So much shit spinning.
Just used up.
Used up is a good way to look at it. And try and get some downtime this weekend.
I'm going to try. What about you? Do you have any big plans?
My plan is to be content.
Oh, naturally. It sounds good. I think you can pick that up for $19.99 at your local bookstore.
Oh, man. I hope that you do find some opportunity to just be content, or at least start that practice of when you notice that your mind is wandering, you have to be intentional about calling it back and say, let's be content, even for it's just 5 seconds at a time, and start to build that.
Yeah.
But I'll be interested to see if that's something you're truly interested in building into your life, how that goes. But that's a place where a mentor could be a great asset too. Or a place where, as a peer with more experience in a certain thing, I can help you with. So, it's all about mentorship and building relationships and
talking about shit.
Yeah,
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
All of it. Yeah, so go over to thathighschoolbook.com. Check out the book. It's a lot more organized than this conversation. And if you have specific questions, man, please feel free to reach out to us. If you don't have anyone else to talk to and you're trying to figure out, where do I find a mentor? Where do I find someone that I can start to talk through some of this stuff with? Give us a call, man. Reach out via the website. We're happy to connect and just have a conversation. If you want to come on and discuss it here on the podcast and just be on the phone with us, that's totally fine too. We'd love an opportunity to learn what's going on in your world, in your life, what's bothering you, and just let us walk through it with you. Doesn't mean that we're going to give you great advice or that anything is going to be meaningful directly out of it, but sometimes it's just hearing yourself talk through it as we're listening could be the breakthrough you need.
Yeah. An ear to listen, a shoulder to lean on.
That's right. Or cry on if necessary.
Yeah. So. Let it fly if you need to. That's cool.
All right, brother. Well, I think that's about it, right?
That's all I have to say about that.
All right, Forrest. We'll see you next week, brother.
All right, take care, man.